The following program has been pre-recorded, so please don't call in at this time. If you wish to participate in the program, tune in at 5 p.m. every Wednesday for A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good evening, Baton Rouge. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought. Good to have you here tonight. And tonight we have a very interesting guest. He was on the show back in December, the first time he came out in the local news and in the Independent of Lafayette regarding corrupt state activities in the Atchafalaya Basin. Fraudulent, actually, I guess. Dan Collins, good to have you.
Thank you, Wayne. I appreciate it.
You're a landman, right? You arrange deals and stuff like that for the state and other people?
That's right. We do title research, go out and secure signatures for various projects, and we were actually on contract basis working with the state for a period of 12 years. Okay. And I also wanted to mention my co-host is here tonight to assist me in drawing you out, which probably won't be required. Lang Baker, great to have you, Lang, as usual.
Thanks, Wayne. Glad to be here.
Okay, just a little background on why you were in the news. I think it was last March, was it not, when you won your whistleblower lawsuit against the...
No, actually, Wayne, is in December.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
The trial was really supposed to be in early 2015, but the state managed to delay it about 3 times, and it was actually in about December 8th. It was a 5-day trial in 2015.
Okay. The reason I asked, or I guess why I had March in my mind, is because I'm looking at an article from Acadiana Business, which goes by the online name ABiz, which is a sister publication of the Independent in Lafayette. But they state here that with the headline, "Atchafalaya Antics Alive and Well, although his legal battle continues, a whistleblower is finally vindicated in a case that should, but almost certainly won't, send some current and former state officials to jail." And that was basically, if I recall correctly, you were hired to arrange a land deal for the leases or rights to property for a federally funded, or at least partially federally funded, project to improve the environment and do some work in the Atchafalaya Basin, right?
Right. And Wayne, basically, just to give your listeners just an overview, we started doing work with the Department of Natural Resources back in the 98 time period and all the way up until 2010. Basically, as everyone's aware, we have a significant land loss that occurs, and so under the Department of Natural Resources and now the Department of Coastal Protection, there's a great deal of resources that go into trying to save our coast.
Right.
And so, basically, with landmen, a landman is a term that comes out of the oil and gas industry. It's the guys that go out and do the title work, figure out who owns the property, goes into the Office of Conservation, looks at existing pipelines, existing oil and gas leases, wells, make sure that if the state's going out to do this project for coastal protection or coastal restoration, that in fact they got the right permission from the landowners to do that.
Okay, and when you were doing the research for the case in question, the one that you blew the whistle on and then were retaliated against by the state, and a jury found that you were retaliated against, you discovered that this was not actually a project, even though it was getting federal funding, this particular project was not actually being conducted to protect the environment, but in fact was going to allow dredging, which would damage the environment, so that oil companies could come in and drill on private lands and enrich them, right?
That's right. As a matter of fact, the project that I identified was known as the Bayou Postilion Water Quality Project, and it was spun to the state, by the state, that this was for fishermen and craw fishermen to improve the water. And in fact, just by chance, I happened to be at a trade show in Houston in 2007 and noticed that this very first water quality project in the Atchafalaya Basin program was actually, they were promoting oil deals. And when I got back to town, I looked into it and discovered that there were 7 wells drilled at the end of this water quality project, this so-called water quality project.
All with at least partial funding from the federal government.
It was anything that's done by the Atchafalaya Basin Program is in part federal funding. They tried to tout that this was all state funded, but we beg to differ that any and everything that's done in the basin, particularly with the Atchafalaya Basin Program, is partially federally funded. But what we ended up discovering, and what I ended up bringing to my superiors, and this was at the time when Secretary Scott Angel was the Secretary of Department of Natural Resources, was an oil and gas program at the end of the dredge. And so I brought this forward, and it was amazing, the cover-up that actually took place and the obstruction of information.
Well, Scott Angel is a candidate for Congress now. Surely he didn't know anything about all this, right?
He knew everything about it because I brought it to him and put it front and center to not only to my superior, who at the time was Robert Benoit, the Atchafalaya Basin Program, but to the top, to the Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources. But over the course of from 2007 through 2010, when I ultimately filed suit in June of 2010, we didn't know at all exactly what happened, other than what I was able to obtain from the public records. It took a while. It was like putting a puzzle together.
Okay, but you ended up going to court because the state stopped sending you contracts.
That's correct.
And you won that suit, and a jury awarded you $750,000. What's happened since then? I know you were recently in the news again, I think in July, regarding that case.
We've been in the news quite a bit, Wayne. But just to give your listeners an update.
Have you been in the Advocate?
We have been in the Advocate, although the Advocate, for some reason, has just had limited coverage. There's a publication out of Lafayette, The Independent. They have a sister affiliated group called ABIZ.
Which stands for Acadiana Business.
Acadiana Business. They've been right on it. And they've recognized some of the significance of the items that we discovered. I mean, we discovered things like in the public bid process for oil and gas leases, they actually changed the name. And this is all through the Office of Mineral Resources.
OMR, yeah.
Yeah, OMR. Someone within that organization actually changed the names on the bayou to throw off competition, to throw off environmentalists, to throw off people like myself who were actually doing this work. But we found a number of items that we presented to the jury. The state tried to say that we were confusing the jury, that this was complicated, and jury came back and said, no, this is not complicated. It's pretty.
Imagine that. Yeah.
It's pretty simple. When you show, where they're changing names on bayous in the public bid process for state oil and gas leases, and when you find where they remove names for signature parties that won't sign certain documents, they just take them off. We found a series of things, but we were very fortunate to win the trial. The jury awarded my firm $250,000. That was treble damages because it was an environmental whistleblower violation. They also awarded attorney fees and expenses and interest. And that was in December. Shortly thereafter, the law firm that was handling the matter for the state, Oates and Marino, out of Lafayette, Louisiana, the same firm that was appointed to do the work, defense work, by Secretary Scott Angel, same individual that I had brought this to, and when we discovered all this information, they have since filed for an appeal on behalf of the state. And that process started at the beginning of this year. They've managed to delay several times the whole appeal process. So basically, what's happening is this will now go to the First Circuit Court of Appeal, and the state is appealing the verdict and the award that the jury rendered. What happened that was kind of interesting back in February of this year, when we realized that they were going to appeal, I started looking over some of the documentation that we had received during the whole discovery process. And it was interesting, Wayne, because I discovered a letter from June 23rd of 2015. Now, this is after the original trial date that was pushed back. You know, last year, my trial was supposed to be in the early part of the year, but the state, the law firm managed to push the trial date back several times. Coincidentally, it was pushed back just beyond the governor's election. And if you recall, Secretary Angel, who had left the secretary's position and went to work for the Public Service Commission, he was running for governor. In fact, he came in third. But it was interesting that the trial date got pushed back beyond that governor's race.
But now, isn't the appeal process being pushed back now?
Well, that's right, and that's what I mentioned earlier, that here we are now in the appeal process. We should have been well on our way with the First Circuit reviewing this information. But again, the law firm Oates and Marino has been pushing back and delaying, and so only this week did my attorneys get a copy of the brief that's being submitted to the First Circuit.
Is that usual? Is that common?
Well, it's they can get delays and granted dates, but I find it unusual because it's such a long time. I mean, it's almost a year. The trial was in December of last year, and here we are now in November. But I find it unusual because, again, here we are with a congressional election now instead of the governor's race. The same party that I brought this information to, in which I was awarded reprisal. The same party, I might add, that I filed an ethics complaint against. In accordance with my contract, I was considered a public employee,
right,
working for the state. And if I saw something wrong, I had to bring it forward. Part of that was also I had to adhere to the ethics rules and regulations. So I filed an ethics complaint against Mr. Benoit and Secretary Angel that the ethics, and again, I'm prohibited from disclosing that particular complaint, but the ethics board deferred to the jury and basically said they were going to let the outcome of my ethics complaint be decided by the jury. Well, here we are now successfully having won and in a position now where we're delayed because of this appeal process.
Which is being, do you have any idea who's responsible for the delay or any guess?
You know, it's interesting because we come back to Oates and Marino, and we come back to this letter that I was telling you about of June of 2015. And I'll read this to you because I find it interesting. We believe we have previously produced these documents. However, out of an abundance of caution, we are providing them again. And that just kind of struck a nerve with me when I read that back in February of this year, of calendar year 2016, after the award of $750,000 and after I had heard that the state was going to appeal. And so I started looking at the documents a little bit closer. And one of the things that I discovered was this law firm, Oates and Marino, one of their partners, Larry Marino, and two other partners within the firm had formed this company, Louisiana Property Acquisition. They were one of the firms that my land firm was competing against.
Okay, now let's clarify this. On July 15th, Acadiana Business again, with the Independent, has a story titled "Oates and Marino Involved in Simultaneous Billing During Collins Whistleblower Suit." Is that what you're talking about?
That's exactly. And for your listeners, if they want to get a comprehensive review, if they pull up the ABIZ or the Independent in Lafayette, they'll be able to see that article where it references Oates and Marino and simultaneous billing. And because what I ended up doing, is, commencing in February, is I hired a law firm, another law firm, in addition to the firm that we were successful with on the judgment. And this firm, we did nothing but make public records requests in the law firm's name in regard to this Oates and Marino and Louisiana property acquisition. And what we found was what I believe to be very startling information. I believe that through this firm, they withheld certain documents that should have come forth in discovery. And I go back to that June 23rd of 2015 letter. Producing any documents at that date, our deposition deadline had been well past that. So anything they gave us at that time was irrelevant because we couldn't use that with questioning people because it was submitted so late.
Okay, so but anything, the deposition date had long passed, but if they had in fact provided those documents during discovery, they would be public record now, right? I mean, you'd be able to get them.
Well, what we found was they produced some of the documents, and the documents that we received commencing in February, March, April, May, through this other law firm was real telling. It revealed that in actuality, one of the contracts that I bid on, it was a contract in 2008 that my firm bid on along with, I think, 8 other firms, was actually awarded to Louisiana Property Acquisition. It's LAPAC is their acronym. And what's interesting is that's the company that was formed by 3 of the partners of the same law firm, Oates and Marino. At that time, the law firm was Hudson and Oates. They've since, one of the partners have died. But the firm set up this company and was competing with us for the same type services that I do, land services. Well, they actually received this contract that I bid on in 2008. This was one of the contracts we discussed at length to the jury. What was interesting is, and what they failed to disclose to us in discovery documents, was that Hudson and Oates, now Oates and Marino, they were actually listed as a subcontractor to Louisiana Property Acquisition. And so
Oates and Marino was, or yeah, Hudson and Oates, okay.
So they were actually doing work under the very contract that I was bidding on. They actually did work under that contract that they were awarded. Now, this was an RFP that came out in 2008 that my firm bid on. It was properly advertised with the Department of Natural Resources. It was to be a $200,000 to $300,000 contract for 36 months. That's not what we've discovered actually happened at all. And that was what was some of the shocking information. What we discovered was, well, first, they went beyond the 90 days. When you submit these, when the state submits these requests for formal proposal projects that go out, they went beyond 90 days. The Secretary Angel, actually entered into a discussion well beyond the 90 days and allowed the law firm and the partner, Louisiana Property Acquisition, to rebid, to actually reduce their hourly rate and rebid well after. They didn't allow any of the other bidders to do that.
Reduce their hourly rate to rebid okay.
They got to rebid the contract. And what the Secretary did was, instead of it being a $200,000 to $300,000 contract, he went to $750,000. And then within 6 months, they increased it an additional $1,500,000, and within a year, they increased it another $2.45 million, so that contract that was advertised for $200,000 to $300,000, that was supposed to be for 36 months, went to $4.7 million.
And this is a federal project, supposedly.
That's
so
correct.
Everybody in the country is having to pay for this. And that's all this is mentioned here in the article with Acadiana Business. I did want to mention to the listeners, though, very quickly, that the Independent of Lafayette and Acadiana Business, its sister publication, are accredited media outlet. They received 27 awards from the Louisiana Press Association right after, not long after they first opened, after publishing only 16 issues, for best reporting, best feature story, best photo, most effective use of graphic design, and lots of other things. So they are an acclaimed, creditable news source, right?
Oh, they're a noted, well-respected news source.
And Mike Stagg is the one that broke some of these stories here, but I'm looking here. There's also a Wince Nully on that staff.
That's correct. They did an outstanding job. But we carried our research further. We determined that Oates and Marino had some 42 expired contracts and 4 existing contracts. The expired contracts was over $12,462,000. The existing contracts was over $2,016,000. So it was almost a little under $15 million in contracts. We also discovered that Louisiana Property Acquisition, they had 3 expired contracts. It was almost $10 million, $9,749,000.
Now, by expired, you mean they've been finished and they've been paid this money?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And then the most recent contract they got was last year in the general administration for $5 million for coastal work to carry them into the year 2018. So between these 2 firms, they have close to $30 million in contracts. And so, we saw the irregularities of what happened, how they were actually listed as a subcontractor, the law firm, with this company, Louisiana Property Acquisition. But we carried it a little bit further, Wayne, and we started looking at the online campaign contributions. And, what we found was, as recent as 2015, the firm Oates and Marino they were giving office rent to Mr. Angel from $1,000 a month from March through July of over $5,000.
They were renting an office from Scott Angel.
Well, no, actually,
they're paying it. That's
they
what
were
they're
actually
calling
paying it, and so they had to produce that in the campaign contributions.
Ah.
They were providing him with transportation services. Mr. Oates was flight transportation information. It didn't stop in 2015 for his run for governor. They went back in the records. It's clearly a record. Goes back to 2010. When Mr. Oates, Stephen Oates, and Larry Marino was giving Mr. Angel individual campaign contributions of $2,500 apiece. In 2012, when he ran for Public Service Commission, Oates and Hudson, they were given $5,000. They, in fact, back in 2010. When it was listed as statewide, undecided statewide campaign. There were $5,000 contributions from the same law firm and from Louisiana Property Acquisition.
Okay,
all the way back to 2010.
Yeah. Okay. And actually, there's an email here in the article, the July 15th article of Acadiana Business, that they state was initially a message to Scott Angel from his secretary, I think, and then one from apparently Scott Angel that says, "Tell her to set up a call Tuesday at 9."
And that's totally prohibited. You're not supposed to. I mean, it clearly says in the records that specific language say no later than 3 p.m. Central Standard Time they give the date. No amendments will be allowed. I mean, but for an RFP to be advertised at 200 to 300,000 for 36
request
months,
for proposal, yes,
to go to 4.7 million following this unorthodox method, I just cannot see how it happened.
No. Well, look, getting back to the original case in the Atchafalaya that you were punished for trying to publicize. That's a federal case. Surely the federal government got involved in that.
Well, it's an interesting thing, Wayne. I believe, it's my opinion, anything that you do in the basin is federal.
Mm-hmm.
We had issues with the permit. We had issues with mitigation. And under normal circumstances, the federal government would be all over it. But we're talking about this information was brought to the highest level. We brought this to the General Administration. I brought this to Timmy Tepel. It went directly. I was told went as high as it could go. But what's interesting is this dredge that took place at the Bayou Postilion. The property owners on either side, the cousin of the property owners, was Governor Mike Foster. So we're talking politics all the way to the top. And we found this event where the public bid process, they changed the name on the bayou to make it look like it was 20 miles away. We found that happened in 2004, 2005. And as recent as 2014 and 2015, I found the exact same thing occurred on the adjacent bayou to the south, on the same landowner's property, where the same thing took place. They changed the name on the bayou in the public bid process. And what's interesting, we looked at the campaign contributions. The oil company that purchased that lease, McMoran Oil and Gas, out of New Orleans, it's the same scenario where the plat was changed in the public bid process. That firm, their CEO, had donated $1.85 million to the gubernatorial campaign of Scott Angel.
Scott Angel. I wonder if his opponents in the upcoming election know about this stuff. But
Wayne, it's not a secret. Some of the publications have set this information out. I know the Independent has run articles. Years ago, the Baton Rouge Business Report had an article, the Advocate, on the website of the Atchafalaya Basin Keeper. There's a number of the articles, but the information's there. It's all public information. As I said, it was like putting a puzzle together.
Sure. Well, they're not going to make it easy for you, Dan. But I haven't seen a whole lot of coverage in the local press with Baton Rouge, and you would think, being the capital of this state, where the government is and everything, they would be on that and be exposing it like crazy. I mean, this is the liberal media, right?
You would think that the Times, Picayune, and the Advocate would pick this up, but we're going to the heart of corruption at the highest levels. And it just by chance did I come across this as a public employee and a contractor, because we're at the right place, the right time. But I'm a fisherman also, Wayne, and I love the outdoors, and I can tell you I'm pretty passionate about it. When you're spending state and federal funds in the name of water quality and calling it a water quality, and saying you're doing it for improvement for fishermen and crawfishermen, and they drill 7 wells at the end of the dredge, it's a joke. It is just a farce, is what it is.
Yes, and we can see why so many Louisianians are cynical about their politics, but maybe it's time to let some people know what's going on, especially the fishermen and sportsmen. There's a recent article that came out yesterday. It was the cover story in the Independent in Lafayette that you're holding there.
Yes.
And give us a brief summary of what that is and share that quote with us. We got just a couple minutes here.
Well, the Independent did an article. It's pretty interesting. It's called "The First Time It's a Mistake, the Second Time It's on Purpose."
That was changing the names, right?
That's changing the name. That's
Okay.
where the name was changed in the public bid process for state oil and gas leases. But Mike Stagg did an actual interview, and he interviewed the assistant secretary, who happens to be former Governor Kathleen Blanco's son-in-law. And Mike Stagg pressed him. And he said, I'm curious if there was any wrongdoing. He said, but, and I'm quoting the Office of Mineral Resources Assistant Secretary. He's saying, look, it's nothing but a bunch of good professionals, petroleum land people and land specialists, Boulette says. Then he adds, but, we close at 5 o'clock. And if somebody's going to come in and, doctor something for their own benefit, I can't speak to that.
Right. We don't really know what goes on. I was looking